Alright YouTube, welcome to another video. This one a little bit different. Today we're going to be working on the DRZ400 Supermoto, turning it into a wheelie friendly bike for me. So if you're interested in turning your DRZ Supermoto into a stunt friendly bike, here's a good place to start. So let's go ahead and get to some of the mods that I added to this bike. Alright, before we get into the stunt part installation, I wanted to swap out wheels. So I have gold wheels on this bike. It looks pretty hot as it stands today, but I'm going to be doing a theme for this bike. I need white wheels eventually, so in the time being until I can get some white wheels, I'm going to go with black ones. So I reached out to Adam to see if he wanted to switch wheels and tires, and he did. Unfortunately, I didn't have a jack for a dirt bike, so I had to use a floor jack. All we did was lean it back on the kickstand and slid it right underneath the frame. It worked out fine. The 24mm socket I didn't have because I have a Grom, and I think the top is like a 17 or a 19. So we went out to Home Depot, picked one up, got the wheel off, bearings fell out, got hung up on the caliper a little bit, but once we got it off, it was fine. My tire was a little bit big, so I have a 160 tire, 140 stock, so it actually required us to take the chain guard off to be able to get the tire through the swing arm without getting hung up. Once we finally got both wheels and tires off, we took off the stock rotor off Adam's tire, which will become mine or his wheel, and then I add my EBC front rotor for a DRZ. So that's all it is a front rotor for a DRZ 400 Supermoto, and that works with the bracket that we're going to be using. I also used a 52th rear sprocket, so going from a 41 to a 50. One thing I'm not too proud about is the fact that we didn't look underneath the sprocket to find out that there's a nut there holding it in. We're stupid. I'll edit that out. So once we discovered that, we made a little bit more progress instead of just trying to crank it down. But it still did require a cheater bar. Some of these were torqued pretty tight. And then threw the 52th rear sprocket on the rear wheel, threw some blue Loctite on there and tightened it down. Here's a look at the dual caliper setup, Brembo P32 Calipers, and then this dual caliper bracket. There's going to be links to all these parts in the description down below. While trying to install this, we decided to remove the chain guard completely instead of just backing out the bolts, and then it just allowed us to get a little bit more room to freely wiggle it in place while keeping the bearings in place as well. So next up was a little bit of a goof on my part. I wanted to replace the chain because obviously it wasn't going to fit with the bigger rear sprocket. I also planned on replacing the front sprocket because it was currently a 14 tooth and the stock was 15, so my ideal was going to be a 15 tooth front and a 50 tooth rear. Unfortunately, I forgot to replace the front sprocket before measuring and breaking the chain. Once I remembered it, it was already too tight as it is, so there's no way a 15 tooth was going to fit. So I had to leave the 14 tooth on there until my new chain shows up and we replace that. I decided to do the rest of the work on the bike, so right now I'm just adding the Brembo P32 Calipers onto the bracket, using some blue Loctite to hold the bolts in, just going hand tight on here and then a little bit extra, nothing too crazy. So Adam's going to be running the same handbrake setup as me, so we get his wheels all situated and get it back on the axle, put the bracket and the calipers together and do the same thing, tighten them down hand tight, and then we torque down the rear axle nut to 72.5 foot-pounds. After a quick little lube job on Adam's chain, we move on to the CoreMoto stainless steel brake lines. I highly recommend CoreMoto if you're going to be doing stainless steel brake lines. Besides them having outstanding customer service, you can actually customize the product completely. So if you want to do a different color line, different color label, or if you want to have a different bend to change in the length of the brake line itself, so if you want to go from a stock +2 or just have a customized like 82-inch handbrake line like I'm doing, you can do that with their website. So it's actually pretty cool. As you can see, I went with a 45-degree bend, so that just means as the Banjo comes off the caliper, it bends at a 45-degree angle, just angles it down with the swing arm. I can't take credit for this. Shout out Mason, he gave me that suggestion. One thing I wish I had when I went into this was a dirt bike stand, like a proper one. Unfortunately, I couldn't use the floor stand to put it under the frame. It wasn't holding it up, so I just put it on the header. Probably not the best place, but it worked, and then I stabilized it while Adam removed the wheel. So one thing to note is the front stainless steel brake line is just a stock length, so there's no difference there. And then we switched positions, and I wiggled it back in there, putting the speed sensor back in place. Then I just torqued it down to 30.5 foot-pounds. Next up, we move on to the brake line, so it's time to add some fluid and bleed the brakes. I'm not going to bore you with all the instructions on how to bleed your brakes. There's plenty of tutorials out there, but it's just a repetitive process and it's a little bit tedious, but you have to do it to make sure you have brakes. Obviously, you don't want to have any air bubbles in your system, so if you don't have a bleeder vac, it's just a manual process of pumping the brakes and then opening and closing the bleed valve to release any of the air that might be in there, and then just to move the brake fluid through the system. She good. The only thing different is on the Master, where you also have a bleed valve up there, so you just got to make sure to bleed it at the caliper and at the lever for the Master for your handbrake. And that's it for Adam's bike. We got him all set up so he can head home. I'm still waiting on my handbrake to show up the next day. And my new chain. Bye! But as you can see, his bike looks pretty hot with the green and the gold, so I'm happy for him. The next day, my Master shows up, so it's a Magura HC1, the same thing we put on Adam's, except for mine's a 12mm versus his 13mm handbrake setup. So all I did was go on eBay and I purchased a KTM 1290 Super Duke Clutch Master. So if you want to save a few bucks, go check eBay. So these handbrake setups that are offered through some of these stunt websites, you can buy them off used wrecked bikes as well. My buddy Mason came down to hang out and help with the installation, so all that was left for my bike was install my handbrake, bleed it, and then replace the chain and the sprocket that we messed up on the previous day. I went with a non-O-ring chain for the second round, mostly because that's all Amazon Prime could get me the next day and I really wanted to ride. Then we just broke down the chain, got the links correct, attached the Master, and then just adjusted the chain so there wasn't any excess slack. And once we got that done, we just torqued down the front sprocket nut to spec, and also the axle bolt again. One more mod that I didn't show is my clutch lever, so I replaced the stock clutch lever with an easy pull. Right here is a How Racework. They've been bought out by Elite, but in recent days I went ahead and changed that to an RSC clutch lever, which I really like. It's a true one finger pull and it's really smooth. Alright guys, so if you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button down below. Helps me out a lot. Share it with a friend. Leave a comment if you have any questions, or if you just want to say, good job, you didn't mess something up, or if you have some suggestions that I missed. Feel free, leave a comment down below. All right, we're gonna go and take the bike out to the lot and see how it wheelies. Let's go do it.
That little Grom over there. Hey, get a real bike.